again to our very generous sponsors in Bourke Sports. If you're watching on YouTube, you'll see their details right there now, www.bourkesports.ie. Check out their range if you're listening on the podcast, and you can get in touch with their rep, Norma Clancy, norma.clancy@bourkesports.ie. They're sound lads. Give them a shout if you're looking for any gear. They look after you. Davey, welcome back. We missed you for a few weeks. You've been rehabbing an injury, or is that letting the secret out of the bag for the championship at the weekend?
No, I think, thanks Adrian, I think that secret is well and truly out of the bag. There's a lot of rumours going around, and again, a few texts, you're definitely gone. Again, a few from the Crattle lads, you're definitely back. But again, I still don't know, and the game's only on Sunday, so we cutting it right down to the wire, so we'll see how it goes. But
it's always interesting when other people know more about your injury than you do. It's always a surprise for yourself. Yeah.
Before we get going, and we might kind of bring this up again later on with Sarah, but the big rumour that's been going around was I'm joining Cork City. Would you believe that? Yeah.
Jeez, I've seen you play for the market. You certainly won't be joining Cork City.
but I got 3 texts saying I'm joining Cork City, but I'll be definitely putting that one to bed right here, right now.
I'll be looking for it on Paddy Power. If you are, you might give me the old heads up there, Davey, if that's all right. I hear these things. I remember last year I got a text congratulating me on getting the Limerick Camogie job. I was like, Jesus, that's pretty much it's news to me.
That's the one you turned down, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, that's it, yeah. You have to be offered something to turn it down, Davey, isn't it? That's the way it goes. But look, we'll move swiftly on. Very interesting one today, I suppose. Our guest is one of a select few who's played senior championship for 2 different counties in Camogie and across the GA, of course, as well. It's very unusual. So we've ex-Cork and Dublin star Sarah Donovan, so I think she'll have plenty to say for herself, so no point us wasting any more time talking about it. We get her on, Davey.
Cheers, Adrian. And Sarah, you're very welcome to the Women's Hurling Podcast. It's great to have you on. I suppose before we start, a very interesting background on both the sport front and the work front. Ex-Cork and Dublin Camogie star. But again, we're so looking forward to hearing your stories, and we know you have a bit to say, and hopefully we'll get a few intriguing stories out of you today.
Right. Okay. Well, I hope I don't disappoint.
We might have to get a few digs in now as well, because you gave us a few clips on Twitter and stuff when we were starting out. So that's the real reason we have you on now, is to give it back to you. That's the real reason.
That's fine. That's fine. I'll deal with that too.
Well, look, Sarah, we'll go right back, I suppose, to when you were starting to come on the county scene, your later years underage and getting on the Cork panel. Tip would have been dominant at the time. They had 5 titles in 6 years. It was only interrupted by Cork stopping them doing the 4 in a row. But I suppose you were part of what would have been tagged, I suppose, as a golden generation coming up along. You had some serious talent underage that Cork people were pinning their hopes on. So tell us about your underage teams. You had some serious operators.
Yeah, so I would have played probably a year above my grade for 14, 15 and 16. And the year we won the minor, which would have been the under-16 grade at the time, 1999, we had the big hitters that year. We had Joanna Callaghan, we had Emer Dillon, we had Gemma O'Connor, we had Jennifer O'Leary. And I was slotted in corner forward. And if you couldn't do a job corner forward with the supply you were getting, it was on you, and it wasn't on Cork, you know. So I suppose that was my first experience of playing with Cork. Was you always judged your own performance on how much ball you actually converted, because you were getting loads of it. Later on in years, as I moved on in clubs and with Dublin, you noticed that the ball wasn't as plentiful supply. So that was probably the first wake-up call.
Yeah, it's a different ball game altogether, isn't it? It's just a different level, I suppose. And like when you went into that Cork panel, I suppose that was the first real, like we're all familiar with all the names now, but that was the first real great Cork panel of the modern times, I suppose. Like you mentioned Gemma O'Connor there, she'd have been quite young, but like you were going into a panel with Mary O'Connor, Rena Buckley, Breach Corkery, all these. Like what was it like going into training with them every night, stepping up from underage to, I suppose, nearly having to perform every night you went to training with a group like that?
Yeah, I actually, after we won the minor, I decided to transfer club. I was to move to Ballygarvan, and I suppose I wanted to be in a very competitive team, and that's why I chose to move to Ballygarvan. But as a result, I had to sit on the line for 104 weeks. So I suppose one door closes, another one opens. I decided to go playing soccer, went playing soccer with Cork City, then went playing soccer with Ireland, and before you knew it, the 104 weeks were up. But I was mad to get back then, obviously playing camogie. So I think I had a point to prove. And when I went into the setup, then I suppose there was animosity there. So I would have been 19, you know, cocky, arrogant, coming into the setup, and I had a lot to prove. And I suppose I would have felt going into the training sessions that I was wearing my gloves every night, you know. So those 3 years were interesting in that you kind of built a thick skin, but we also started winning. And, you know, in that environment, you really enjoy the pressure. And that's what it was. It was constant pressure because, as I said to you, you were getting as much ball as you needed, and it was on you to deliver it.
To be considered cocky and arrogant in a Cork setup is some achievement.
I felt it, and look, you know, you get to a certain point, you just keep going, and also, like, I was trying to break into a forward line that was very efficient and very composed, and it took a lot of work. And I would have said, like, I came on in the 2 All-Ireland finals, I would have been 19 and 20, and that was a big achievement for me to break into that team and be considered, you know, in the 16 or 17 that year, both years, 2005, 2006. But, you know, it was a big learning curve as well. They were much older than me, the girls, and I had a lot to learn.
Have you heard the rumours down in West Cork that Davy is the new Cork City striker?
Yeah,
the Shane Long of West Clare are calling him.
We were literally just talking there, and I've been out with an injury, and the rumour going around Clare is I've joined Cork City. So we were just before you came on, we put that to bed.
That's not true, even though they could do with your help massively so.
You haven't seen me play soccer now, as Adrian was pointing out. But Sarah, you mentioned back in 2005 that when you came on as a sub, and again you were part of this rebel treble and all that goes with it. But I suppose that stage, you must have thought that there was a decade of good times to come, especially in that Cork jersey.
Yes, 2007, as you said, we were going for 3 in a row, and that Wexford team completely caught us off guard. Didn't anticipate that they would do that to us in Croke Park. Didn't anticipate that they would have the confidence and the cockiness to actually implement a game plan that they were so sure of. But, you know, Una Lacey rocked us for 2 goals within the first 10 minutes of the game, and we were playing catch up after that. And I remember just different things going wrong around the pitch, and a real sense of nervousness as the team realised that this team was in a fight. And then you had Kay Kelly's engine kicking in, and you had that level of assuredness and Mary Lacey's composure and the way she was delivering ball. And all of a sudden, we weren't in the position that we were a year previously against Tip, where we were in complete control, you know.
No, it's probably like they probably came in under the radar at the time, but obviously they went on to one of the greatest camogie teams of all time. So it's probably, look, retrospectively, there's probably a little bit of consolation in that. But as you say, at the time, it would have been seen as a serious shock that they were able to do that to you, I suppose.
Yeah, and they had so much motivation, and we probably hadn't read into the motivation with Mary Lacey and her sister and their mom and all of the ex or Wexford players who were involved over the years. We didn't know that their daughters were so entrenched in it, and that's a naivety on our part as well. I like when I was 17, 18, my focus was on trying to get goals off Uno Dwyer or trying to put one past Joita Delaney. You know, I wasn't thinking about Mags Darcy. I wasn't concerned about Mary Lacey, you know, and for them to come on so quickly.
There's probably nothing in the media about it either. Like, I suppose if that was this day and age, well, you'd hope, but not necessarily. But you'd imagine there'd be some sort of a preview where it'd be rolled out that these were the daughters of the legendary Wexford team in the 70s and stuff like that. So you're probably coming in a bit blind to it, I suppose. But I remember we'd always tell a story. One year I was involved with Mary I, and we went down to play UCC in the Purcell Cup, and we were so naive to the coverage of camogie that, like, we presumed that all our players knew that this was UCC's first team, because it was the only year UCC had never been in the Ashford. They got relegated once in the history of the whole college. So we went down anyway, and they got absolutely riddled. Like, and we figured out at half time the players didn't even know who they were playing against. Like, they didn't know that there's Katrina Mackey and there's whoever over the corner.
There's Amy O'Connor, yeah.
Yeah, but there was no coverage whatsoever of it. Like, so it's kind of, it just goes back to what you're saying. Maybe there was no way they should have known. They could have known either. But look,
we just didn't know we did not. You know.
Yeah, so they were there thinking this is their legacy, and you hadn't a clue who they were. Sure, look,
But we
that
learned,
happens.
but we learned pretty quickly after. So
That's it.
So
And look, I
basically,
suppose.
you're blaming the management, so I didn't prepare you.
Hold
there's
on,
no
we'll get to
tactics
that.
involved.
We'll get to
That's the
that.
first headline.
We'll get to that. So anyway, Sarah, you went travelling, and then we'll talk about the management. So you went travelling for a few months after that, and when you came back, then you were asked to join the intermediate squad. So, like, having been, I suppose, first sub, second sub on in a key, I suppose, crucial stages of our Ireland finals, to go to being asked to be on the intermediate panel, like, were you ever given a reason for that, or was it explained to you at the time, or was it just a case of, look, take it or leave it?
My face didn't fit, so
Yeah.
that was how it was. That was how it was dealt. You know, I was too cocky, too arrogant, too disruptive, and while I don't agree with that, you know, if you're not wanted in an environment, then you got to move on. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I would have always seen those things as my strength, because they would have been things on the pitch that I would have felt would have driven teams on. But you know, at 22 years of age, and I was probably 23, 24 at that point, I just cut my losses and said, that's fine, I'll go back playing intermediate. And I had started working with the Evening Echo and the Examiner, and I had started, I suppose, doing a lot of reporting, and it was going well for me. So, you know, I was in Croke Park covering the All-Ireland hurling games, and I started to move into a sphere that I didn't anticipate that I would end up in. So I suppose I had the medals, and even though there were only two, it had kind of taken the sting out of it.
Yeah, it's strange now when you say it like that. Like, so maybe at the time, maybe you're ahead of your time a little bit, because now, I suppose, if you look at Thompson and what she brings to Cork, and she has that bit of a swagger and that bit of arrogance and cockiness, and so across different teams, the top players are really the ones that wear their heart on the sleeve and kind of deliver. So maybe it was just didn't, as you say, it didn't fit what Camogie was at the time, possibly as well. You know?
Would you think? Would you think there was a kind of reason beyond that? Okay, like when you're given the jersey to represent it, like everything else should be dropped, and you kind of chose traveling over, we say, put on the jersey, or do you think that could have been something behind the reason as well?
No, I think probably I gave them an opportunity by leaving. I gave them an opportunity to kind of put me into that bracket, and then it was a case of me not, you know, being allowed an opportunity to come back in. Like the first time around when I went into the Cork panel, the previous year we would have won the Senior Camogie Championship with Carrickdown, so we would have beaten Milford in the county final. 6-11 to 5-11, an absolute rip roar in Park Urin, and you know, that team, that Milford team, was backboned by the likes of Anagiri, and Ashling was playing, and the Watsons, and I think that championship alone, as is that cockiness that I'm talking about, like I would have graded my season on what I had scored, and I think I scored 10-10 in 6 games, and I was like, right, that's enough for me now. That puts my hand up. I've scored 10-10 in 6 games. I've now, you know, put my hand up to say I'm ready to play Cork Senior. So when I left to go travelling, obviously I didn't have that window then to do that again, to make that point. So you're right, maybe my form hadn't come back to justify bringing me back in, having left as well.
You weren't short of options, though. As you said, you mentioned there, like you played a bit of soccer quite successfully, really. I suppose play a bit of soccer is probably selling you short a little bit. Captain Ireland in the Euros is more than playing a bit of soccer, I suppose, to be fair to you. And you played a bit for Cork City, like Davey here. But you had a bit of a sliding doors moment with Eamon Ryan. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, we were up in Belfast, and we were playing the Lynch Cup. This would have been 2005, and the Lynch Cup would be obviously second tier, and the O'Connor Cup was first tier. And I had gone up playing Lynch Cup because I loved playing football, and my club Valley Rovers were very competitive. So I kept my toe in with Valleys, and then with UCC, because I was on scholarship, I was able to obviously tip in and play Lynch Cup. And we had beaten Davy Fitz's LIT team actually in the Lynch Cup, maybe the semi-final of the cup, and Eamon was on the sideline, and he called me over and he said, listen, you're very raw, but I'll work with you. I said, Jesus, David. I said, I don't know, like, if I can spread myself that thinly. And he said, have a think about it. And I spoke to my dad about it. My dad was like, Sarah, you know, you're just after getting your foot in here with the seniors, and, you know, you'll be split between training sessions and you can't afford to miss it. And, you know, it's just not the right time for you. Now, ironically, we didn't know at that point that Cork were going to go on an epic run of 10 All-Irelands, or 11, you know, that was 2005, and that the accommodation would be so great. So, you know, do I regret saying to Eamon, yeah, go on? But, you know, hindsight is a great thing, but I do, you know, I'll always be straightforward. He said, you're very raw, which meant I had the basics and I had a bit of determination, and he was willing to work with it, you know.
Yeah. Look, yeah, that's it. Joe, at the time, I suppose if you had been more established on the Camogie team, it might have been easier to go, look, I will give the football a shot as well. So, look, it's easy to look back, but yeah, like that Relentless is one of the best sports books I've ever read. It's great. So it's like, it's some story, but I suppose, as you said, at that time, they were coming from a very, very low level as well. So there's no way you could have known, I suppose, what was going to come out of it, you know?
No, and I had played minor and under 21 with Cork football to that point, so we were getting, we'd gotten a couple of hammerings in the previous couple of years. I didn't mind putting myself out for a hammering, but, you know, I didn't anticipate that they'd go on such a great run. So, and at the time, it was a massive commitment. The girls were training in all manner of places, you know. I don't even think they still trained in Páirc Uí Chaoimh, you know, but like they were really out in the sticks in terms of the options that they were getting for training. That was another consideration. How are we going to manage that? So, yeah.
Exactly. I think then it wasn't long after you kind of moved to Dublin and joined St. Vincent's, and again, not long after then joining Vincent's and playing with Vincent's, that Dublin came knocking. What was the thought process there? Like, was it, oh yeah, we'll give this intercounty another shot, or were you hesitant and had to be convinced?
No, Emer Dillon, a great buddy of mine from Ballygarvan, had joined Vincent the previous couple of years, and Aoife Ryan, another girl that I played college with in UCC, and they were afraid that because I was living in Sandyford that I was going to join Ballybowden, right? And they rang me and said, listen, you know, will you come and join the Vincents just in case, you know, Ballybowden come looking for you? Now, Ballybowden had won 4 county titles on the trot. So it would have been very easy to stay Southside. Right? But I said, no, I'll come in 2014. And that season, I suppose, getting back to play with Emer and Aoife and be in an environment again where, like, I hadn't played camogie for 4 years, because I had been playing soccer with Cork City kind of all through that time. And that was a real learning curve, because, again, I was very raw, having been away from it for so long. Yeah, my catching was good, my striking was decent, but my touch was awful, you know. So I was kind of a battering ram in centre forward for them, and that's how we kind of worked it the first year, where I just there was a job to do at centre forward, and that's the only job I had to do. So we ended up losing to Ballybowden by about, I think we lost them by 2 points in that 2014 county final, and real dejection like after it, because this was 5 county finals in a row that the girls had lost as a unit, and I think they were going, God, are we ever going to see a cup, you know? So we went back in 2015 with new management, and the year just kind of turned for us. I think we just got a couple of breaks in the summer, and the confidence started to really lift. But I would have seen Lucan as our biggest threat that year, having played them during the league, and that proved to be so. We played them in the county final, and they took us to a draw, and then we ended up way out to play them in Bourne in 2015, and we ended up winning it by a point, having been 8 points down at half time. There's a girl, Sarah Collins from Limerick. I don't know if you know her.
We do, of course, yeah.
Yeah, so Sarah was playing full forward for Lucan that day and had 3 goals in the back of the net before we had even taken a breath. So winning that title in 2015 probably kind of galvanised Vincent's as a unit. That was, I had obviously joined Dublin at that stage as well, and I kind of skipped my point there now. But the reason I joined Dublin was I think I saw it as an opportunity to make my face fit and kind of bury some of those demons that I would have had from leaving Cork and not having had an opportunity to play and finish it out the way I wanted to finish it out. So I didn't anticipate, obviously, us doing so well that summer. We were coming off the back of I think the girls had lost by 34 points in Park Urin the previous year. So Shane O'Brien came in November of 2014 and said, right, girls, you know, we're going to hold trials. Whoever wants to turn up will turn up. I turned up from Cork, and then Rose Collins from Limerick turned up to play fullback. And myself and Rose had gone toe to toe loads of times with Cork played Limerick back over the years. And it was great to see a friendly face. And from that January, now we trained like dogs with Shane. But we obviously got a bit of a run, and we ended up playing Clare in that crazy coin toss game in the summer. You probably both remember that and think, how did a team end up in that position, or two teams end up in that position?
We often refer to it on social media as snidey, actually. If we're losing an argument with the Camogie Association, we just go and look, have it all coin toss about it. They always win the argument.
and like that, and I swear that's how mad it was, because we had been training out in Stillorgan on the Saturday evening, and we got this news that the Camogie Association were going to do a coin toss. And Shane O'Brien called us in and he said, look, girls, I can't control the narrative here. If we don't win this coin toss, you're out, you know. And we were like, but this seems so unfair. We've been training for 10 months. And I was thinking, oh God, after all of this, after coming back at 30 and, you know, and now I'm not even going to see out the championship. It just felt incredibly frustrating.
That's bizarre, isn't it? Bizarre.
Yeah. So for us to be able to go to Thurles and play it on the day, fair and square, that was the makings of my summer, because I got player of the match that day, and as a result ended up with an All-Star nomination. And I suppose that was something that I had never anticipated happening when you go to play with Dublin after, you know, 10 years after playing with Cork.
It's that coin toss is just, it's bananas, isn't it? Like the year we won the minor, we played Cork in the last group game. We were we thought we were already through, because we presumed Offaly were going to take a hiding in the last game. But then Offaly won, and like we won by a point down in Cork. It turns out if we'd have drawn the game, we'd have been out of the championship based on the fact that we hadn't scored enough goals or something. Like we would have been ranked third on goals scored or some bizarre rule. Fucking hell. Like, where do they come up with these things from? But then if you're playing in the B championship, it goes on points scored. Or it's like there's a different rule for every championship. But like, I suppose it was still brave to go in with Dublin coming from where you are, because like, I remember Dublin weren't in great shape at the time. Even in 2015, we were with Limerick, like we gave you a few trimmings and challenge matches, and we didn't think much of you at the time. I don't mean that in a bad way, but like, we never feared Dublin or anything like that. So again, much like the Cork football, like you couldn't have seen that you were going to end up where you ended up in 2017 when you did agree to join the setup, you know. And I suppose like you had a decent 2015. Like still in 2016, like I think you won 2 competitive games in the whole year. And then David Herity took over. And you just went on this run. Like, so like, I suppose obviously things were building from what you're saying under Shane O'Brien, but what did Herity bring that sparked such an improvement that led to you going as far as you did?
I would say that, well, David was with us in 2016. So David came in as coach in 2016 for Shane. Shane and David had a very different way about them. But when Shane kind of brought David in 2016, David came more and more to the fore. David basically looked at the Dublin setup and said, right, they can do X, they can't do Y. They're good at X, they're not good at Y. I'm going to create a game plan and create a team that is very, very fast, has a lot of work ethic, and runs with the ball. Now, as a result, all of my key skills were no longer required.
Yeah, you don't want to hear that as a player, do you?
No.
It's like when I went into Aerogue and told Dave we were going to focus on our aerial game. That was it. He was out the door then. 2 years.
And look, that would like my aerial game was my strongest feature of playing camogie. It's catching ball, like in the square, in the half-forward line, catching a ball in midfield for Vincent. All of those things they were my strengths. Carrying ball, 40, 50 yards to hand pass it off. Not really my cup of tea. So I remember actually, I probably got a good warning in early 2017. I knew that I was going to be surplus to requirements based on David's style of play. And having been in the game for 20 years, the writing is on the wall and you can see it pretty quick.
Mm-hmm.
We went out to UCD early 2017 and we played them in a challenge match. And Dave threw me in corner forward to put me out of the way, right? I ended up getting 2 goals after 20 minutes. And he brought me off the field and he said, Sarah, he said, yeah, Grant, you got 2 goals. But he said, I can't trust you. I don't trust you. And I said, how do you mean? And I said, but what did you want? And he said, no, you're too, he said, I just don't trust you. And my understanding of that, and I would have picked up the phone afterwards and I would have rang my dad and I said, Dad, this is what happened. And Dad said, you scored 2 goals. And he said, he doesn't trust you. And I said, yeah. And I rang Jamie Wall, and Jamie obviously would be a big confidant of mine. And Jamie said, he'll probably give you enough room now to put yourself out of the team. But what he's saying to you is you're not in his plan.
Yeah, it's interesting. That's very interesting. It's really interesting because I listened to Herty on the Anthony Daly podcast the other day. And it was actually very good. And it sounds like he pulled a Cody on you, and he admitted this himself on the Daily podcast. When you went to Dublin Camogie first, he felt he had to be Brian Cody, and he tried to treat the players like shit the same way as Cody treated him, and he thought this was the best way to go about it. And it just sounds that's like exactly what he was doing. He was trying to test you, maybe go, don't trust you. And he'll openly admit that himself. If you listen back to the Examiner podcast, it's like that's how he treated players. He thought it was actually Michael O'Grady who told him to cop himself on that if he wanted a boost out of the team, that he'd actually need to treat them like human beings. This is Herty's own words on the podcast.
Yeah, I would have been very thick-skinned, and I wouldn't have minded that. I suppose the other part of it is that I would have been very vocal and would have said, Dave, you can't do that. Mm-hmm. You shouldn't do that. And I would have said it to Michael as well. And I would have rang Michael O'Grady and said, Michael, you're going to lose players here. This is what's going to happen. And the 2 lads were very firm with me, and they said, if you're going to be, you have to understand where you are here. You're on the way out. Mm-hmm. So I would have been very understanding at the start of the year that if I wanted to stay in, then I would have to understand that I was surplus to requirements.
Mm-hmm. And that it's interesting that you mentioned when he was on the podcast, because it came across the way, like when you were telling that story, Sarah, that it felt like Brian Cody was talking to you, because the detail that he went into when he was talking with Daly. But again, it's not the way to treat players, and it's not the way to get, especially in this day and age, it's not the way to get the best out of players. Even if you think that's your plan, that you are surplus to requirements, but that's not the way to do it. Like,
no, it's the Kilkenny thing, isn't it? It's the Kilkenny thing. Like, that's the way Cody operated. Sure, who are we to question him? Like, he won. Look what he's won. But it's old school, and I've seen it in Camogie recently. I won't say where, but again, another disciple of Cody's just like saying stuff to players that's just, you just can't say it anymore. I think they're in a Kilkenny dressing room, where they're cutting the heads off each other. It's like, that's just not the game anymore. But in fairness to Herty, he was very impressive on the Anthony Daly show, and like he was very self-aware of his own weaknesses at that time, and has clearly learned from it as well, which is commendable as well. But it does smack of, that sounded like something Cody would say, you're too old. Like he kept saying to Herty on the podcast.
Look, that was January 2017. That was a cold night in January, and I had thought I had done a great job. I had scored my 2 goals. I came off the pitch and I was buzzing, going, oh, maybe, I don't like, I was injured, but I was hiding it. And when I say hiding it, I was probably carrying an injury that I didn't realize how serious it was. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking, it's grand. I feel good this evening. I've scored 2 goals. And then you get that commentary from him. And I was like, I don't trust you. And I was like, God, how am I going to make you trust me? Mm-hmm. And we had gone to play we'd gone to play Wexford in a challenge match that January as well. And we went down to Wexford to play them. We went down with 17 players. And again, I knew as much about David as I knew from 2016, but it wasn't very much. And I ended up having to play midfield because we were light. And I had played with Vincent's midfield the year before, so he obviously said, look, she'll be able to engine, she'll be able to engine it out. And we ended up beating Wexford for the first time. I think it was the first time the girls as an adult team had beaten Wexford, right? It didn't matter because it was a challenge game down in Wexford in January, but to us it mattered. And came off the pitch afterwards, and David was standing outside the dressing room, and he said, you did a job for me today. And I said, yeah. And I was like, yeah, like a puppy. Delighted with life, but so naive to the fact that I was not in his plan.
Yeah.
I was only doing a job. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, did you listen to that podcast with the man?
Yeah.
And compared to so that's coming out in media, it's one thing. As a person, is there a difference, or was he the same person on the podcast or when you were dealing with him?
Exactly the same person. Like there's nothing. I don't have any animosity towards David for how he treated me. He treated me like he treated the lads, right? Or he treated me like I suppose our only misfortune was that we were the first team that David took after he came out of that environment with Brian. Would David have treated us differently 2 years down the track? Potentially, but I've always been of the frame of mind that I would like to be treated the same as the way as the lads would be treated, right? So I got it fair. I got it Brian Cody style.
But but it's funny that you say that now, because I suppose I coach a men's team and a women's team. Well, 2 women's teams and a men's team. And keeps the wolf from the door. But I know treating the lads. I could never even imagine speaking to the young lads in Ballinamere like that. Like, it's just, we've moved on as a country and a society, I think, from that. That kind of way of speaking to people just doesn't exist anymore. It's like I just couldn't picture it. Look, I suppose everybody's style is different. I hope as a nation, our style of coaching has moved on to just speaking to people and looking for improvements and that kind of stuff.
I think he probably regrets it. I do think he probably regrets the conversations that he would have had with me then. But I can't take those back. No, just in the same way as I can't take back not sitting when in a Cork setup in 2007. Like these are parts of sport that I have either failed or succeeded, and that's just another part of the jigsaw.
That's sport, isn't it? I can remember one night, Davey, with G up in Air Oak. Remember, we'd been going very well, and we played Ina in a challenge match up in Air Oak, and I just felt the G down tools in the second half and just didn't body or bollocks, and I just lost it. It's the last time. Like, I did regret it, but it happens. Like, it does happen like that. You just absolutely lose with players sometimes. Like, but I suppose it can't be your modus operandi 3 nights a week to do it. But yeah, look, it definitely does happen. But you spoke about being injured there, I suppose, Sarah. Like, there is a very not famous video, but I suppose a highly viewed video from AIG of you going through a serious regime to get fit again. I'm not sure which season that was.
That was 2017. That was the year that David had said I was surplus to requirements. So
yeah, so there's obviously a bit of that motivation there for you to kind of to keep going as well, I suppose. But I suppose, like, you talk about getting the All-Star nomination there, and then I suppose being told you're finished and stuff like that. Like, was that a motivation for you as well to keep going? Like, you've been told that you were done, you're surplus, you kind of felt your surplus. Like, what was the motivation behind that? Because you looked almost, I suppose, nearly psychotic in your training. What was the motivation behind that? Like, were you just mad to show them you were wrong and get back in the field? And
I tried. I think because the group of players that were there were so fast, and they were playing a nice brand of camogie, and there was a real kind of a movement in the setup. You know, all, you know, what is it? Tides raise all boats, or
Mm-hmm.
you
We
know,
got that, yeah.
and like I was thinking, look, you know, yeah, the girls are very fit and fast, but they're going to need, you know, if we end up playing Wexford or Kilkenny, and I'm around the square, God, I'd love to be, you know, antagonising Mags Darcy again. You know, I just thought I'd have a window of 10 to 15 minutes in some game that my level of physicality would stand to the team, and that I'd be able to get a goal and pull a goal from somewhere. And that was what my motivation was, to get one more goal, or, you know, to get one more 15 minutes in championship.
Mm-hmm. And just talking about towards coping with your injury as well, I suppose you kind of mentioned it slightly at the start that you're friends with Jamie Wall, and again, we know him very well down this part of the country. His Mary I team kind of gave us a few clippings with you or with LIT. But you've worked with the Mark Pollock Trust as well, and you've kind of spoken about the perspective that this has given you on life. Did this help you with your attitude towards coping with that, with the couple of injuries?
Yeah, so in 2014, I suppose when Jamie was injured, I started working with Mark, and it was quite serendipitous in that Jamie was injured on start of June, and I was offered an interview with Mark, and I went in for the interview with Mark, and Mark was sitting there, and Piers was sitting next to my former boss, and they said, "What's your motivation for work with Mark Pollock Trust?" And I said, and I just bawled my eyes out, as you shouldn't do in a corporate interview. And Mark said, "You know, can you get her a tissue?" And Piers said, "It's grand. She's got loads of tissues. I had tissues like spread all over the table." And the two lads obviously went home, and I remember Mark saying to me after that he'd gone home to his partner Seaman and said, "Did an interview with this girl today, but she bawled her eyes out. But we think she'd be a great fit in the team." And Seaman said, "You know, never misjudge compassion for weakness, and you should absolutely bring her on board." So about 3 weeks later, I brought Mark to see Jamie, and Jamie was in Beaumont at that point, and he was about, I suppose, 4 weeks down the track. And Jamie came in to meet me and Mark had this mad carbon fibre chair, and Jamie's chair was this run-of-the-mill hospital chair. And Jamie said, "Jesus, your thing's like a Land Rover. I'm driving a Fiat Punto." And I just couldn't stop laughing. And I think Mark, at that point as well, was like, "Yeah, Jamie's going to be okay." You know, for it's such a dark humour to be letting loose in a hospital 4 weeks after being paralysed. I think we were all, you know, happy with the light relief. But from that point, I suppose everything was intertwined, because the work that I was doing with Mark, and then, you know, my relationship with Jamie, and then playing camogie with Vincent, and then getting to play camogie with Dublin, and then being able to bring in AIG to see how the work that I was doing with Mark, I suppose it was lovely to be able to marry all of that, and to give him that level of exposure that he necessarily wouldn't have had, you know, in the GA community previous to that. So those 4 years were nuts. You know, they just, that was a whirlwind from 2014 to 2018.
I'm a firm believer, like, in kind of, as you say, the serendipity of it all. But like, maybe if you had stayed on the Cork panel, none of this would have happened. So like, I'd have to look back at things in life and go, "Geez, I wonder if that hadn't happened, would I still be doing this now?" Or, it's like, so I suppose it all does work out. It all works out to plan in the end, doesn't it? We're going very deep there. We get back to camogie before we get too deep. And just if Neil Fenn is listening to this, Davey actually is good in the air. I was only joking. you can
on the back post, is it?
Yeah, on the back post, yeah. But I suppose, look, the season ended quite well, despite all that. Like, you had a famous victory against Wexford, obviously, in the quarter final. Now, the semi-final didn't go your way, and I suppose took a bit of flack in the media afterwards that it didn't look like he made any attempt to actually win the game. That kind of Dublin looked happy enough to keep the score down. And I suppose, look, I've been that guy in the press box, and it's easy to say it when you're up there sitting back with a cup of tea watching it. You know, like, Kilkenny had that serious forward line, they still do. But like, was there any regrets within the squad that, you know, Jesus, maybe we should have had more of a cut off this? Like, these opportunities don't come around that often.
Ironically, in we had in 2015 and 2016, we got better results against Kilkenny than we had against them in 2017. In 2015, and this was in Parnell Park, first round of championship, we were incredibly well organised. And we had our older stock playing. So Katrina Power was in corner back, Elaine O'Mara was in wing back. Elaine O'Mara kept Nice Gall scoreless, and Elaine was going in for the Guards at the time, and she was fit as a fiddle. I mean, she gave her a terror of an hour, and I think they ended up winning it like 12-9. Now, like, we were so tight with them in terms of cutting them down, not allowing them to express themselves. We stopped the overlap. We did so many positive things in those games that we actually really were excited about playing them. And then in 2017, we kind of went away from the things that made us, not against other teams, but specifically against Kilkenny. We built them up so much in our heads that they became this ferocious beast that couldn't possibly be tamed, you know. And I remember being down in Kilkenny watching them play in championship on the sideline. I was just back from injury, and we weren't even able to bat the ball. Like, that's how poorly our skills were. We weren't actually doing anything. And I know you said you would have seen us in 2015 and 2016 and you didn't think we were any great shakes, but some of the games, the likes of Kilkenny, and again, we played Cork and Parnell Park in 2015. We were level at halftime, you know, and it was actually the first day that we had played Orla Cotter and Breach, and I ended up in midfield, and I gave Breach a whack on the back of the leg, and she turned around, she's like, Sarah! I said, I'm playing for Dublin now, you know. And it was a real, like, I think those are the games that I'll remember most playing with Dublin, because those were the games when we were really giving teams stick.
The common denominator there when you're talking about the games you played well in is Parnell Park, though, which is a horrible place to go. It's like a runway. It's the longest, narrowest field you ever see. It's like about 200 yards in the goals here where they can touch both sidelines from the square. So it's definitely an advantage. It's an advantage to Dublin teams in hurling and camogie if you get to play there. Like, so it is a tough place to go, and you need to be used to it. And it's just the dimensions are a bit strange, and it's definitely, I feel, it always gave Dublin an edge anytime we played them there, whether it was in hurling or the camogie. But
yeah, I agree. I loved it. I loved playing in Parnell Park. It really felt like a home for us, and that's probably why I missed some of the older players, because in 2017 a lot of our more seasoned players were gone as a result of the cull. And
the cull. There's our headline anyway. Sarah Donovan talks about the cull.
Like the cull of the Dublin setup. Like, yeah, I know. Look, if you look at the team from 2015 to 2017, you'll see. Yeah.